this book was terrible. There's not a lot of books that make me feel like I wasted my time, but this was definitely one of them. Hello, welcome back to my channel. I am Monet and you're watching Life is Monet. This video is going to consist of 10 of the worst books that I read in 2021. I did my best to put these in order, and although I feel like the middle and maybe like the least worst could be interchanged, definitely like my top 4 are like set. This video will consist of minor, I'm gonna try to keep it minor, spoilers, because there are several mystery thrillers on this list and it's hard for me to talk about why I hated them without actually like sharing why I hated them, and most of them I hated because of the twist. So proceed in watching this video at your own caution. Okay, number 10 is a book that I have unhauled, and you'll see it mentioned in my unhaul video, and that is going to be Roxy by Neil Shusterman. I read the Scythe trilogy at the end of 2020, I believe. Like I read it December, and I think I finished book 3, which is The Toll, on like January 1st of this year. So that was my first time reading from Neil Shusterman, and I really love the Scythe series, and I actually really like the writing, and I went forward from there reading other books by this author, and most of which have been at least 3-star reads. And so when I seen that he was coming out with another book, although I wasn't really excited about the synopsis of this book, I was just excited to read it because it's Neil Shusterman, and it's another book that he wrote with his son, and they both wrote Dry together, and I enjoyed Dry. I thought it was over the top and dramatic and just entertaining. I read it in like a day, and it was just like compulsive to read. If you don't know what Roxy is about, it's kind of hard to explain the synopsis of this book. Roxy is centered around modern day drugs that people consume, and we're following 2 kids, and I can't remember their names, but they are a brother and a sister. The sister has ADHD and a lot of times makes very impulsive decisions. She's not doing good in school, and she doesn't want to take her medication, and so she makes bad decisions because of her ADHD, causing her to make impulsive decisions, which are typically bad. I just went in a circle there, so ignore that. And she gets caught up with like bad boyfriends, bad friends, skipping school, and then she kind of decides to make a decision to take Adderall, which is what was prescribed to her for her ADHD. And as she's taking Adderall, she is getting on the right track. She's doing good in school. Everything seems to be working out. It's helping her fix a lot of her impulsive and bad decisions. There is this speculative element to the book because the drugs have actual bodies, like they're real people, and the drugs exist in like this party that's forever ongoing, and at this party everyone's trying to get whoever's using them or whoever's taking them to the VIP section. And if you get them to the VIP section, that's pretty much like the height of this party, and that is typically where the user of said drug will go to die. And all of these drugs are aiming to get their person to the VIP part of this world. So you are in kind of like, you're following the brother who is really good in school, but then he gets hurt, and his grandmother gives him Roxy, which is an opioid, and he starts to develop a codependency on it, and Roxy and him think that they are like in love with one another, and so he's developing a habit of abuse for opioids, and he does things like hurt himself on purpose to get more opioids, and no one in his family is noticing what's happening to him because his sister is the one that normally like gets all the attention because she's like the troubled teen. And so they're so focused on getting her medication and getting everything figured out with her that they're not noticing that the brother is like descending downwards. He's not hanging out with his friends anymore. He can't remember stuff. He's showing up all hours of the night. He's very drowsy and aggressive. And so basically Roxy and Adderall is, when we're talking about the party, I know it's hard for you guys to follow me, but like in the speculative world where we have like all these different drugs, we have like Phineas, which is kind of like morphine. We have like the cocaine brothers, like any drug you can think of. There's weed. Her name is Mary Jane. There is ecstasy, like every drug that has been manufactured that people take for whatever reason, whether it's to get better or not, they are attending this party. And Adderall is kind of picked on by the other drugs because he's not someone who typically enjoys the party. He doesn't take people to the VIP room, so he doesn't have any street cred. And Adderall is tired of that. And Adderall's cousin is, let me think of her name, Rita, which is Ritalin, of course. And the drugs literally act like how they make their users act. Adderall is determined to finally get someone to the VIP section. And Roxy is one of the main ones that's just like, you don't have it in you, you don't have the guts, you don't have what it takes. Like, I am the best, you know, new hot thing on the streets. I get everybody to the VIP room. And Roxy and Adderall make a bet that they're going to have a competition to see which sibling they can get to the VIP section first. And so he starts to encourage her to overdo her doses, but he's also trying to make her solely dependent on Adderall, which is, I guess you could say, an addictive substance, but it's also one that people use in combination with other drugs to get a better, like a more heightened experience. And so he's trying to get the sister to the VIP room, which is the place of overdose and dying, but solely off of him and not mixing it with any other drugs. And then there's Roxy, who starts to actually fall in love with her user, which is the brother, and they swear that they're in love together, but every time they get together, he's like losing it because, I mean, he has an opioid addiction at this point. And like at some point the book just got totally ridiculous, and you get to follow other interactions. Like Mary Jane in the book has now been legalized in a lot of states, and so she acts as such. She walks in to the party and she used to be the life of it, but now she wears a business suit and now she's all super formal. However the drugs act in real life, or how they're perceived in real life, is literally how they act in this book. There are other drugs who are not used as much anymore, so they're kind of like washed up at the party. There is a section of the party where like drugs have been pulled off the market because they've been made new and improved. So there's a section of like people who aren't allowed to the party anymore because their time has passed and they're like considered historic, and everyone's like trying not to be the historic one. I don't know, the book literally was as ridiculous as it sounds, and I think it was supposed to be symbolic and kind of like an allegory for how drugs are and like the influence that they have over people. And while I do feel like a lot of the drugs were depicted in a really good manner, also in the conclusion with the brother and his battle for opioids, but it honestly, like, it just got ridiculous. I don't see a lot of people enjoying this book. It is a YA book, but I would probably never recommend this to someone who is young, between, because YA is for what, 12 to 17 or 13 to 17. I would never tell them to read this book, especially unsupervised, because so many things were happening that were just kind of depicted in a light where you can have your own takeaway. And at some points the book just felt very damaging. And yeah, there is some really cool points that they touch on in terms of opioid addiction and how the system works and how easy it is to keep this addiction under the table. No one really noticed it. So I get what they were trying to do with the book. It just fell really flat for me, and it was just, not only was it disappointing, because if it was just disappointing, it wouldn't be on like my worst of the year, but on top of it being disappointing, it totally missed the ball, and it was just ridiculous. Like, I feel like the time that should have stayed in the drafts. Definitely should have stayed in the draft. I don't think that is a book that should have been published. Coming in at the number 9 spot is going to be Hinch. This is a book about this character. I'm having such a hard time remembering the main characters in these books, guys, so I'm very sorry. But we have this character who works for a villain in her world, and she's pretty much just a clerk for him. She does paperwork and online like billing stuff and just like database accounting type stuff. And she gets this position where she has to come into the office for this villain, and these heroes show up, and like there's this big battle between the heroes or the superheroes of this world and the villain, and it's actually modern day, so think like Gotham City, I guess. And she gets really hurt to the point where she needs several months of rehabilitation. And as she's sitting home, unemployed, bills stacking up, she gets very upset. And she decides that she's going to expose superheroes for the dangerous people that they are. She's going to start this online kind of like blog and talk about like how damaging superheroes is to the world because of the buildings that they destroy, the cars they destroy, the people that end up getting hurt, how many people end up dying just for them to save one person, how like much tax dollars and people have to pay and damages to fix whatever's happening. And she pretty much compares superheroes to being as destructive or even more destructive than a natural world disaster such as like a hurricane or a tornado, and people are like getting on board with that. And so she gets this job offer to come and work for this villain, and he gives her her entire team, her own department, and her job is basically to make the lives of superheroes a living hell. And they do stuff like mess up their dry cleanings, expose infidelity in relationships. It's just they do everything they can to be a nuisance to superheroes. And this book, the synopsis and like the premise of this book sounded so good, but in theory it was so freaking boring. And I honestly feel like the transitional gaps between the significant events in this book were just too far apart. This book was way too many pages. It honestly probably would have been a lot more fun if it was short as like a novella. I think that the author probably felt a certain amount of pressure to make the book 400 pages. I think it was like just at 450 pages when I read it, but that felt like reading 800 pages. I kid you not. Like, it was just so freaking boring, and I didn't care. Like, by the time we got to the end, I didn't care about the twist. I didn't care about like the big reveal. I didn't care about this supposed relationship that may have been sparking between our main character and the boss. It was bad. I had to switch to the audio of this book just to finish it, and I don't even think I think I quit at like the last 20 minutes. I literally think that I had like 30 minutes left of this book, and I just returned it to the library. I wanted that book so far away from me. I had a physical copy because I did think that the cover was really cute, but I unhauled it. It had to go. There's not a lot of books that make me feel like I wasted my time, but this was definitely one of them. Coming in at the 8th spot is a book that I ended up doing nothing, and it was supposed to be a buddy read between me and Stephanie from Stephanie's Book First. I seen Katie Roberts all over the book internet this year, and like just how smutty and like steamy and sexy the scenes were, and it wasn't there in this book. It was cringy, it was uncomfortable. She needs to leave. What is this, like it's a book that follows different villains as they have like this scandalous sexual relationship between each other. It was a mess. It was a pile of mess, and I hate to say this, but if you read this book and thought it was like steamy and hot and sexy, I fear for your sex life. I truly do. Let me not say that. I'm not gonna say that. But yeah, I fear for the sexual lifestyles of the people who thought that this book was hot, because this book was dry. It was dry. It was flat. It was still. It was boring. It was cringing. It was giving, baby, give your life to God, just be a nun, because you are not good at this. I had to take, I'm so glad that I didn't purchase a copy of this book, because every time I go into Barnes and Nobles, they have like spicy TikTok recommendations at the front, and like all of these books by Katie Roberts are just right there in the front, and they're like pushing propaganda to the masses, because I will never read. This was the first book that I tried to read by Katie Roberts, and I think I listened to like maybe 2 hours of the audiobook, and I wanted Scrib to refund me for my monthly fee for that. So glad I didn't spend my money on that. Don't recommend it. I mean, Sarah J. Maas, A Quarter Silver Flames, which is actually going to be on this list. A Quarter Silver Flames have better and more interesting sex than that. Okay, go read about Reese shaking a mountain. Coming in at the 7th spot is going to be The Woman in the Window. This is a thriller that follows this woman who has a fear of going outside. I think it's agoraphobia. Don't get me wrong, let me look it up. So yes, our main character is named Anna Fox, and she has agoraphobia, and so she does not leave her house because she has fear of large spaces. And she sits at home, and she's pretty much like a peeping Tom. She just watches her neighbors through her window. And one night she thinks that she sees a really brutal murder that happens at this house, and she tries to report it, but it doesn't actually work out. And she becomes obsessed with the kid that lives at this house because she feels this compulsive need to try to save him from the husband and the wife in that home, because she feels like it is a danger, but she cannot actually leave her home. So for 460 something pages, we are watching her watch other people. And she's not exactly a reliable character because she is always drunk. I mean, she goes through 6 bottles of wine a week. I swear she goes to like a bottle and a half of wine every single day. And she abuses her pills and she doesn't really talk to her therapist. So every day she is high out of her mind on prescription meds and drunk as a skunk. And you just watch her be drunk. And the twist in this book was too predictable. There was just so many things that was just wrong with this book. It was too damn long. It was too damn predictable. It was too damn unrealistic and too damn boring. I don't think that Anna was an interesting character. And there's supposed to be 2 major shifts in this book that is supposed to like blow the reader's mind, but you know that Anna is unpredictable. So if you read this book believing everything that she said or that she thought she saw or thought of, the logic isn't logicking. If you know that someone is a liar, but you choose to believe what they say, I honestly want to blame you. I feel like it's kind of your fault because a liar gonna lie, a drunk gonna drink. And at this point, it felt like it was the reader's fault for continuing to go along with this boring story. And I accept the part that I played in that, and I got rid of this book and unhauled this one as well. And I tried to watch the movie on Netflix hoping that it was gonna be better, and surprisingly it was worse. And I don't even know how that's possible, but it was so much worse on screen. So coming in at number 6 on the worst of the year for me is going to be A Court of Silver Flames. I feel like more than this book should have stayed in the draft. Somebody should have selected all and just backspaced this entire book. It wasn't necessary. It wasn't needed. I don't like Nesta. I don't think that she was a redeemable character, but it just felt really pointless. Like, I felt about this book how I feel about A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, because you want us to follow a totally unlikable character that is also unredeemable. And so we just follow them doing unredeemable things, being terrible people. And I feel like Sarah J. Maas wanted us to take Nesta seriously and see Nesta in a different light. So she went and kind of saddled her with all these different PTSD and just emotional and psychological damaging things that Nesta has to work through. But it wasn't pushing it for me. It wasn't selling it for me because of, I'm not gonna lie, Feyre. We watched Feyre go through way too much stuff. And a lot of the stuff that Feyre had to deal with was also at the hands of Nesta. And we were supposed to believe that what Nesta dealt with was worse. And I don't agree with that. I don't believe that what she had to deal with was worse. Now, I don't think that everyone handles situations and handles things that occur to them in the same light. So if this was a case of she just didn't handle it with the same grace as Feyre, okay, cool, I get that, because what is big to me may be extremely small to you. We all go to what God decides that we can handle. But this wasn't that. We were supposed to believe that like Nesta had been through the wire, been through the fire, and like she was constantly beat down everywhere she tried to turn, and no one's ever tried to offer her love, and no one's ever tried to, you know, lift her up or encourage her. No, we watched for 3 full books in a novella, people constantly giving you patience and kindness and trying to reach out an olive branch, and we watched you lash out like an animal to everyone who tried to even care for you. I don't feel like any of the large topics that Sarah J. Maas tried to cover in terms of rape and mental illness and anger and PTSD, it wasn't handled properly. This book is entirely smut, and if we were just going to get a book about Nesta and Cassian having sex everywhere all the time, that would have been fine. But trying to like throw in all of these heavy topics in the midst of them having sex every 23 pages for 23 pages, it was a no. The book was just disharmonious and it made no sense. It got very cringing at times, and I feel like this was more of a fan service and people just wanted another book in this world, and people just wanted to follow Nestia and Cassian and like in this relationship, but I don't believe that they are right for each other. Honestly, I feel like pairing Nesta with Cassian just told me that Sarah J. Maas hates Cassian, because I mean, the choices, anybody would have been better. Anybody would have been better. I think that it was a hate crime. It was a hate crime to make them bond mates. Book number 5 is going to be Iced by Karen Marie Moning. I have raged about this book in several videos, and I will link that in the cards up above so you guys can go and see. But this is book 6 in the Fever series, and we have to follow a very, very, very annoying child named Danny, and she is being fawned over and lusted over by these 1,000-year-old creatures who are super powerful, and Danny is 14 years old, and not only are they like having hard-ons while talking to this girl because she's very like stubborn and rebellious and sarcastic and just, you know, everything an annoying 14-year-old girl is, and these men are just like, yeah, I like the fire, I just want to rip my clothes off, and it was disgusting, honestly. I can't even say that this is like the worst book that I've ever read, because I'm also going to talk about the worst book that I've ever read, but this was definitely a close second. I don't understand why we had to read this, because there's no real actual plot that is solved in this book. Everything that we're introduced to is revealed in like book number 7. So book number 6 just felt entirely pointless, and I just didn't feel comfortable following this character as she tries to deal with these men who are more powerful than her, and I mean thousands of years older than her, and she's not even thinking about boys or boyfriends at this time. She's not encouraging this. There's no type of like, in her POV, she's not thinking like that. But then you have men who are thinking like that, and it did not work for me. If I owned a physical copy of this book, because I listened to it on audio, but if I was reading a physical copy of this book, I would have chucked it into my fireplace. It would have burned to smithereens, and I would have had a nice little warm and toasty night. Number 4 is the worst book that I've ever read in my life, and that is going to be Artemis by Andy Weir. I did a vlog where I read all 3 books that Andy Weir has published, and I only liked one of them. Only one of them was really good. I did not enjoy The Martian at all. I thought Mark Watney was a jackass, and I stand by that. I don't believe that he is someone America would have sent into space, and if he is someone America would have sent into space, if he's someone who actually graduated and like really became an astronaut for NASA, I fear for this planet. But in Artemis, we have this girl who lives on this moon colony. The moon has basically been colonized, and there's like this setup there where people live and they do mining, and they're trying to like bring more people to the moon. But here on this moon, we have this girl, I can't remember her name, very annoying. She acts exactly, not acts, she is Mark Watney, just with the vagina instead of a penis. It's the exact same character, but she has boobs. We follow her as she's hired to do this heist, and something goes terribly wrong, and the person who hired her to do this job was murdered, and she's framed for it, and so she's trying to run around clearing her name and figuring out what's actually happening. And she discovers that like the situation is bigger than her, and there's huge companies involved. It's basically a war for monopolizing the market on this planet. These companies are getting into it with each other, and the company that she was sent to like do this heist for actually is a cartel, and this cartel is basically after her. So not only did she piss off this huge multi-million-dollar company, the company is actually just a facade for very dangerous people, and there's just so many like insensitive things that happens in this book. The plot is terrible, the writing god awful, the character annoying. I've never read from a more annoying POV, and there is constant sexual jokes in this book, just like with Mark Watney in The Martian, but there's so much slut shaming in this book, and I had to draw the line when our main character was even slut shamed by her own father. Everybody, every time they interacted with her, was talking about her sex life and how many people she sleeps with, but we never actually saw her sleep with anyone. We never saw, she doesn't have a boyfriend. We never saw her have sexual attraction or really even kiss anyone in this book. So it just felt very weird that we have to constantly hear about how she's a whore and she sleeps around. It's like, people are dying. There's a whole war going on. I'm wanted everywhere. And all y'all want to talk about is who has been up in my hoo-ha. It's not working for me, and I am convinced that Andy Weir hates women, and I would never read a book from him again that has a female POV. I'm so glad that in Project Hail Mary, we have another male character. That is the only book that Andy Weir has written that was actually good, and it took 3 tries to even get it. And so I am not understanding this fan base for his writing, because in terms of like sci-fi, there's better books out there. I mean, seriously, better books. So number 2 and number 3 are going to be another author that I don't understand why people love. And that is going to be in the number 3 spot, The Silent Patient, and the number 2 spot, The Maidens. Another book that I should have chucked into my fireplace because it was terrible. I'm going to start with The Maidens, even though that's the number 2 spot. We're going to talk about The Maidens first. The Maidens follows this character. What is her name? Is it Mariana? I don't know. Mariana's, we're going to call her Mariana. If that's not her name, I'm sorry. So Mariana is this group therapist who is grieving the death of her husband and just going through life living a sad and pitiful experience. And one night she gets a call from her niece Zoe at Cambridge University. I think they're at Cambridge. Let me check. They're at Cambridge University, and Mariana's friend has just been brutally murdered, and she's like begging for her aunt to come up there and be with her and offer her solace, I suppose. I don't know. But then as Mariana is at this campus, more people start dying, and she discovers that there is a correlation between these deaths. All of these are female girls who are very beautiful, who come from very prominent and powerful families, and they are all a part of this group called the Maidens for this very beloved professor on the university named Dr. Fosca, I believe that's his name. And Mariana becomes obsessed after being steered in the right direction. She becomes obsessed and starts postulating that Dr. Fosca is the person behind the deaths of these maidens, which is a part of his group. And no one believes her. No one is concerned with Dr. Fosca. The cops interview him. He has an alibi. But Mariana, the group therapist who knows more than detectives and police officers, just knows that he is the person behind these murders. And this is supposed to be a dark academia, but it's really not, because we're following this overgrown ass woman doing a job that she doesn't qualify for. And the one that she does qualify for, she's terrible at. She's the worst therapist that I have ever seen. She does not know how to establish relationships or boundaries with anyone, because we have a patient of hers who is super obsessed with her. He basically comes to her bleeding and mutilating his body, and he's talking about who she's sleeping with and why she hasn't been home in days, and she doesn't call the cops. This man is like, he's bleeding all over your damn kitchen floor, and you're just like, oh, just please go home. What? This man is calling you from like blocked numbers and following you around town, and not once does she say like, okay, I'm gonna put a restraining order out on you. No, this is totally normal fucking behavior. She doesn't even really offer any solace to her niece, who called her up here to this campus because she was just so damn distraught that her friend died. And instead of actually being with her niece, she follows this professor around campus as he's doing professor stuff. Like, she's following his students, she's coming to his classes, she goes to dinner, right? She swears that this man is the one who's killing all of these girls, slitting their throats from ear to ear. And he's like, you know what, I heard you've been looking for me, and here I am. And he invites her to dinner. And so she goes to a dinner at this man's house, and he serves her very, very bloody steak. So bloody that like the blood is running across the plate and is touching her mashed potatoes. And she drinks wine with him to the point where she actually is tipsy. And she has a conversation with him about the bloody steaks that he just loves to eat. And I just don't, it's not, the logic isn't logicking, because if you think that someone is a murderer, why would you go to their house and eat bloody steak with them and get drunk? Didn't even really, I don't remember if she actually told anyone that she was going to this professor's house. So like, she could have just been dead and gone. I wish that he was the killer and he had just killed her then, and the book could have been over. But unfortunately, that doesn't stop there. We have to go to this terrible twist, and the twist is so awful. I mean, this book was terrible, and people swore that they don't know how this book ended up being so bad, because The Silent Patient was just so good. And I said, you know what, okay, I'm gonna read The Silent Patient. And then I read that, and it's the same book. It's the same book. We have another therapist who is also very terrible at their job. And he becomes obsessed with this woman who shot her husband in the face and then never spoke again. And he is determined to help her. And so he gets a job at this asylum called The Grove. And he is supposed to be the therapist of all the patients. But he doesn't actually see any other patients except the one that doesn't talk, because he's determined to help her. He feels like this compelled, compulsive, like obligation to help her, even though she doesn't talk. And we just follow him as he's a terrible therapist and he doesn't actually help not a single person in this book. And I am convinced that Alex has probably never seen a good therapist in his life, and I don't know if he's reaching out, if this is a cry for help, but we need to get him on Psychology Today, Psychology Now, one of those websites that pairs you with a good, reputable, credible therapist, because these books, they're a cry for help. They're an SOS sign if I've ever seen, because do you actually know what a therapist is? Do you know what a therapist does? And do you think that these are the kind of relationships that are healthy between a therapist and a patient? Alex, I'm talking to you. I need to know. Do you think that this is what therapists do? Is this what your therapist does? Because this is so wrong on so many levels. You're a doctor. I hope that your doctor doesn't act like this. And I think that people are so intrigued while reading this book and the idea of like why she would shoot her husband in the face and then never talk again. You're like reading this and like consuming this because you just have to know what happened, almost like behind her eyes, because you're so wrapped up in like the mysterious relationship between the husband and the wife that you're just like consuming the story, because you have to like you need to know what this secret is and like this relationship between this husband and this wife. And I feel that it is the same way with The Silent Patient, because here's an artist who has never painted again since she shot her husband in the face, and her paintings are being sold for millions of dollars around the world, and it just doesn't make any sense that she just would not talk anymore. And I feel like that is a huge reason in why people felt like this was a compulsive read, because you're like digging through the book to find the answer, and it's just like, oh, okay. But for me, it was just like, I hope that the next book that he writes is not a therapist for a main character, and if it is, I hope that it is after he has managed to find a good one himself and establish a healthy relationship and really understands what a relationship is supposed to look like with a therapist. For the number one book that was the worst book of 2021, I am going to spoil it for you because I don't want you to read it. I care about you enough, I love you enough to just steer you clear from this book. And the number one book is going to be The Other Black Girl. Now, this was a 5-star prediction for me when I seen it. I was just like, ooh, pretty cover. We have a book about a black main character. It's a thriller. It's supposed to be Get Out. It's about this girl that is working in this publishing company, and she is the only black person in her office as like a publishing assistant. I think that's what she is. And one day when she goes into her office, there is another black girl there, and she's very excited to meet her and hang out with her and just, you know, be black girl magic all up in the workplace. But then it gets really sinister, and people are trying to convince her that she needs to leave her workplace. I was even more excited for this when I found out that the author is a black woman who also used to work in publishing, and it just sounded like a match made in heaven. But this book is not a thriller at all. This is general fiction with a speculative element. So our main character, Nella, works at this publishing company, and she has been advocating for more representation, more women of color, more diversity in this very white company. And so when she comes to her job one day and she sees Hazel there, and Hazel, I believe, has dreadlocks, and she's just, not only is she black, but she's like blackity black. We're gonna be besties. And Hazel quickly becomes the center of attention everywhere, and people love her, and Nella's all for it. But then she starts getting these weird messages saying that you're not safe, you need to leave your job. And she doesn't know who's sending her these messages, but it's starting to make her a little uncomfortable. She starts to wonder if maybe Hazel is the one backstabbing her and sabotaging her, because Hazel does some sly kind of things in the workplace, but she can't exactly pin it on Hazel. And Hazel's boyfriend, I believe, and sister opened this hair store. They open this hair store, and Nella comes to the opening, and she's supporting her, and they invite her to this hair party. And at this hair party, they are promoting these organic products that are like a natural hair grease for sisters, so they can just grease their scalps. And as she's at this place, she brings one friend, and her friend is just like, they're trying to tell her that like the store-bought products isn't good for you and all these kind of things. And her friend is like, actually, I don't put anything in my hair that doesn't come with a label. And if I can't like read and like know what's on the label, I don't want to put it on my hair. So they avoid using this hair grease. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to the end and like the twist of this book. We find out that Hazel works for this organization of Black women all across America. And they were called up by her boss that says, hey, I have this Black employee who works for my company and I need her, you know, for the brochures and to say that we are diverse and we have people of color and that we're very forward leaning. I need her. You know what I'm saying? We gotta have that staple Black girl. But she keeps coming to the work meetings and she keeps talking about hiring more Black people. She just wants to like black up the place and she wants us to be diverse and it's making my other employees uncomfortable, you know? So I need you and your handy dandy services to come in and whip Nella into shape. And they do this by trying to get Nella to take this hair grease. And the hair grease is going to make Nella a more approachable, less abrasive, more understanding, more Starbucks venti Black woman. And they will get to have their staple token Black girl without her actually doing any changes or bringing any value to the company. And there is a 10-page dialogue at the end of this book that Hazel says to Nella, aren't you tired of seeing Black people shot on the news and having to cry? Aren't you tired of protesting? Aren't you tired of, you know, speaking up at your company and trying to get everyone to understand race and understand what it means to be Black? Aren't you tired of being that Black woman? Don't you just want to free yourself of that Black obligation? Take the hair grease and forget all your Black troubles and buy Lululemon with your coworkers and everybody could just be the Brady Bunch. And I know that you're wondering what happens at the end of this book. So I'll tell you, I won't keep you on the edge of your seat. Nella takes the hair grease and Nella becomes complacent. And then Nella starts to work for the company and then she starts to travel all over America getting more Black women in line. So at the end of this book, Nella is at a new workplace and she has now been assigned another Black woman that she is going to give the magical hair grease to. I felt targeted. I felt attacked. I felt like this was a direct attack upon me and my sisters all across the world because, bitch, hair grease? Hair grease? What was the point of this? Especially making her take the hair grease, making her complacent. Was it supposed to be like speculative horror? Is that what it's supposed to be? I think what really like grind my gears, this is what like took the cake for me. And like, I wanted to like, I bought this book from Target. I wanted to like chuck it back through and like break the damn window. I just wanted to like, oh, this book made me so fucking angry. What really took the cake for me is that at this hair party, there's other Black women, of course. And all the other Black women, except for Nella and her friend, know what this hair grease really does. And they came here willingly, voluntarily for this hair grease. And they also know that Nella and her friend are involuntaries. That's what they call them. They're involuntaries. And so you overhear this conversation between the other Black women about how they know that Nella and her friend are about to be forced to take this hair grease. And they don't understand why they wouldn't want to take it because it would make their life easier. And although they are about to be forced to take it, it'll work out in the long run. It's for the best. They need it. They just don't know it yet. So this conspiracy, this conspiracy is approved by other Black women. And they know that Black women are about to be forced to take this hair grease. I do not believe that my sisters are the weapon that's formed against me that's going to prosper. I don't believe it. I don't believe that other Black women was just like, yeah, she'll be good with it. Where did you find these Black women? Where? What does it mean? What does it mean? Stay far away from this book. Because I think the book itself is the hair grease. I think touching the book might just morph your brain. You know what I'm saying? I think, you know, the teacup in the Get Out movie, I think that reading the book is the sound of the spoon hitting the teacup. And get out. Get out of the book. Take it back to the store. Don't look at it because it might draw you to it. It is a setup. It's a setup. Those are 10 of the worst books that I read in the year of 2021, and several of them are the worst books that I have read in my life. I'm sorry if you felt spoiled for the other black girl, but I'm saving you. The way that they did at that hair party, this is me saving you. I will see you guys in my next video.